The strangest addictions do not arrive all at once. They arrive one quiet morning at a time. Every weekday at exactly 7:15, she sat at table 7. The first time I noticed her, I thought nothing of it. New York was filled with people who followed routines. People ordered the same coffee, took the same train, walked the same streets. There was nothing remarkable about a woman reading alone in a café. Yet 3 months later, I could not imagine my mornings without seeing her there. The café sat across from one of my office buildings in Midtown Manhattan. Small, quiet, forgettable. The kind of place most people walk past without noticing. I preferred it for exactly that reason. Nobody expected a man like me to drink coffee there. They expected expensive restaurants, private dining rooms, places where reservations mattered. Instead, every morning before work, I sat near the back window with an espresso and reviewed reports while the city woke up outside. And every morning she appeared. She always arrived first. Always carried a book. Always ordered chamomile tea. She would thank the barista with the same warm smile, settle into table 7 beside the front window, and disappear into whatever story she happened to be reading. Some mornings it was a thick novel. Other mornings it was a worn paperback with folded pages. Once it was a collection of poetry. I knew these details because eventually I started paying attention. More attention than I should have. "You are staring again." I looked up from my coffee. Luca stood beside my table, adjusting the cuff of his suit. "I do not stare," I said. He glanced toward the window. "Then what do you call that?" I ignored him. Luca laughed quietly before taking the seat across from me. "You know, most men would simply introduce themselves. Most men are not me." Clearly. His grin widened. "Do you even know her name?" No, I did not. Somehow that fact made her even more interesting. In my world, information arrived instantly. Names, histories, addresses. Entire lives could be summarized in minutes. Yet I had never asked anyone about the woman at table 7. I never wanted to. Knowing too much too quickly felt like cheating. Instead, I watched small details accumulate naturally. She preferred window seats. She turned pages slowly. She smiled whenever she read something she loved. She often tucked loose strands of blonde hair behind one ear when concentrating. Ordinary things. Human things. Real things. The city rushed around her every morning, but she never seemed rushed herself. I admired that. More than I should have. One rainy Thursday, I arrived later than usual. Traffic had delayed me nearly 20 minutes. The moment I entered the cafe, my eyes moved automatically toward table 7. Empty. A strange disappointment settled inside my chest. Then I saw her. She was standing near the bookshelf at the back of the cafe, studying a novel. Relief arrived so quickly it irritated me. I was a grown man. Successful. Disciplined. Respected. Yet somehow a stranger's presence affected my mood. She selected a book, returned to her table, and opened it carefully. A small smile touched her lips. Watching her read, I found myself smiling too. That was when I realized I had a problem, because I no longer looked for table 7. I looked for her. And although I did not know it yet, that morning would be the last time I would ever see her sitting there. Before leaving the cafe, she accidentally left something behind. People leave strange things behind when they think nobody is paying attention. A forgotten scarf. A receipt. A pair of sunglasses. Most of the time those objects mean nothing. They are simply accidents waiting to be corrected. But when I saw the book sitting alone on table 7 after she walked out of the cafe, something told me it was different. First, I assumed she would come back. The bell above the door chimed as customers entered and left. Rain tapped softly against the front windows. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The chair remained empty. The book remained exactly where she had left it. Finally, the young barista approached my table carrying a tray. "She forgot it again," she said with a small smile. I looked up immediately. "Again?" The barista nodded. "She gets distracted when she finds a really good book." Before I could stop myself, I asked, "Do you know her?" "Only a little." She wiped the counter with a towel. "She comes in almost every morning." "What is her name?" The question left my mouth more quickly than intended. The barista studied me for a second. "Emily," Somehow hearing her name made her feel more real. Emily. Simple. Elegant. Suited her perfectly. The barista picked up the abandoned novel. She will probably come back for this tomorrow. I expected relief. Instead, I felt something closer to anticipation. The next morning I arrived early. 7 o'clock. Then 7:10. Then 7:15. Table 7 remained empty. I told myself not to be ridiculous. People got sick. Overslept. Missed trains. Life happened. Yet my eyes continued drifting toward the front window. 7:30 arrived. No Emily. 8 o'clock. Still nothing. Luca noticed immediately. You look disappointed. I look tired. You keep staring at the door. I ignored him. The following morning, the chair remained empty again. This time the absence felt different. Noticeable. Like a missing note in a familiar song. The barista frowned while preparing coffee orders. That is strange. I looked up. What is? Emily never misses 2 days. My stomach tightened unexpectedly. Maybe she is traveling. Maybe. Yet she did not sound convinced. Neither was I. By Friday morning, the book still sat behind the counter waiting to be claimed. 3 days. No messages. No appearance. Nothing. Outside, Manhattan moved at its usual relentless pace. Taxis rushed through intersections. Businessmen hurried toward meetings. Construction crews filled the sidewalks with noise. The entire city continued exactly as before. Yet something felt wrong. I found myself staring at the forgotten book again. Finally, I stood and walked to the counter. May I see it? The barista handed it over without hesitation. It was a worn hardcover novel. The edges showed years of use. Several pages contained handwritten notes in blue ink. Then I noticed something tucked between chapters near the middle. A folded piece of paper. My pulse quickened. Carefully I opened it. It was not a bookmark. It was a note. A single sentence written in neat handwriting. The message was brief enough to fit on one line. Yet the moment I read it, every instinct inside me sharpened. Because the words did not sound like something a woman planning her next ordinary morning would write. They sounded like goodbye. And suddenly, for the first time since I had noticed her sitting at table 7, I became genuinely worried. The note contained only 8 words. If you are reading this, I am gone. I stared at the sentence for a long time. Around me, the café continued operating as usual. Cups clinked against saucers. The espresso machine hissed. Customers checked their phones and rushed toward meetings. Nobody else seemed to understand why those 8 words felt so heavy. Maybe they would have looked ordinary to someone else. To me, they felt deliberate. Final. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it back inside the book. What does it say? The barista asked. I looked up. Nothing important. The lie came easily. Something told me the note had not been written for strangers. Yet all morning the words followed me. By noon, I was sitting inside my office on the 43rd floor overlooking Manhattan. Glass walls surrounded the room. The city stretched endlessly beneath gray clouds. Normally this view helped me think. Today it did not. The note remained on my desk beside a stack of financial reports. I found myself reading it again. And again. Luca noticed immediately. You have not touched a single report. I am working. You have been staring at the same piece of paper for 20 minutes. He sat across from me. What is going on? I hesitated. Then I handed him the note. His expression changed slightly as he read it. That is concerning. Exactly. You think something happened? I looked toward the window. I think people do not leave messages like that unless they expect not to come back. Silence settled between us. Finally Luca leaned forward. Then find her. The suggestion should have sounded absurd. Instead it felt obvious. I knew almost nothing about Emily. A first name. A favorite table. A habit of reading books while drinking chamomile tea. Yet somehow that felt like enough to begin. The cafe has security cameras, I said. Quietly. They might show where she went. Luca smiled faintly. Now you sound like yourself again. An hour later, I was back at the cafe speaking with the owner. Money opened doors. Respect opened even more. Within minutes, a recording from the previous Thursday played across a monitor in the office behind the kitchen. Emily appeared exactly as I remembered her. Blonde hair, light sweater, book tucked beneath one arm. She sat reading for nearly an hour before checking her watch. Then something unexpected happened. Her expression changed. Not fear, not panic, more like disappointment, as though she had received news she had been expecting for a long time. She reached into her bag, removed the folded note, slipped it inside the book and stood. Then she left. I watched carefully as the footage followed her outside. The camera above the entrance captured one final image before she disappeared into the crowded sidewalk. A taxi stopped at the curb. Emily entered the back seat. The vehicle pulled away. Then the image froze. My pulse quickened. "Zoom in," I said. The technician adjusted the frame. The license number became visible. Luca looked at me. "That helps." "Yes." For the first time all week I felt movement, direction, purpose. Emily had vanished, but she had left a trail. Small, fragile, incomplete. Yet it was enough. I stood and reached for my coat. "Where are you going?" Luca asked. I looked back at the frozen image of the taxi to find out who the woman from table 7 really is. The taxi company responded faster than I expected. By late afternoon, a folder sat on my desk containing the driver's statement and trip records. The destination was not an airport, train station, or hotel. It was a residential address on the Upper West Side. My pulse quickened as I studied the report. For the first time, Emily felt less like a mystery and more like a real person leaving footprints behind. "What do we know?" Luca asked as he stepped into my office. I handed him the file. He skimmed the pages. Apartment building. Rent-controlled units. Mostly long-term residents. And no forwarding information. I stared out at the skyline. That would have been too easy. 30 minutes later, I stood across the street from the building. The neighborhood was quiet compared to Midtown. Tree-lined sidewalks. Small bookstores. Families walking dogs. The kind of place where people knew their neighbors. Emily suddenly made more sense. Everything about her had suggested someone who preferred calm over attention. I entered the lobby and approached the elderly doorman sitting behind the desk. His name tag read Arthur. He looked up from a crossword puzzle. "Can I help you?" Most conversations in my world involved contracts, negotiations, and influence. This one felt strangely different. "I am looking for a tenant. Emily Parker." Recognition flickered across his face immediately. Then concern followed. "You know Emily?" "Not as well as I would like." Arthur studied me carefully before speaking. "Nice girl. Always polite." My chest tightened. "When did she leave?" "About a week ago. Exactly when she stopped appearing at the café." "Did she say where she was going?" Arthur shook his head. "No. Just that she needed a fresh start." A fresh start. The phrase echoed inside my mind. It sounded hopeful. Yet something about the note in the book still felt wrong. People starting over did not usually leave messages that sounded like farewells. "Did she have family?" I asked. Arthur hesitated. "Not that I ever met." The answer bothered me more than it should have. Someone as kind as Emily should have had people checking on her. Friends. Relatives. Someone. Instead, every new detail seemed to reveal another layer of solitude. Before leaving, Arthur handed me a small package. "She left this with me a few days before she moved." I frowned. "For me?" "No," he smiled sadly. "For whoever came looking." My heartbeat slowed. "She said that." Almost exactly. The package was a plain brown envelope sealed with tape. I thanked him and returned to the car. Evening shadows stretched across the city as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Emily stood beside a lake, smiling at the camera. The image looked recent, peaceful, ordinary. On the back, written in blue ink, was a date from 6 months earlier and the name of a small town in Vermont. My eyes narrowed. Beneath the location was one more sentence. "If someone cared enough to look, they deserved the truth." I read it twice. Then a third time. Emily had known someone might search for her. Not just anyone. Someone. The realization settled heavily in my chest. She had not vanished without a trace. She had been leaving breadcrumbs. Small clues. Careful clues. as though she wanted to disappear and be found at the same time. I stared at the photograph until the city lights began appearing outside the window. Then I looked at the name of the Vermont town again. Because for the first time since this began, I no longer felt like I was chasing a ghost. I felt like Emily was leading me somewhere. The town in Vermont was called Ashford Lake. Before this began, I had never heard of it. By the following morning, I knew the population, the main roads, the local businesses, and the fastest route from Manhattan. Information had always been easy to obtain. Understanding people was harder. Emily continued proving that. The drive north took nearly 5 hours. As the city disappeared behind me, skyscrapers gave way to forests painted in shades of gold and crimson. Autumn had fully arrived. The farther I traveled, the quieter the world became. Fewer cars, fewer people, more space to think. Unfortunately, thinking only raised more questions. Why had she left clues? Why had she written that note? And why did it feel as though she expected someone to follow them? By early afternoon, I arrived in Ashford Lake. The town looked exactly like the photograph. A small main street, white church steeple, family-owned stores with hand-painted signs. The lake itself shimmered beneath pale sunlight at the edge of town. Everything felt peaceful. Too peaceful for someone trying to disappear. I started with the photograph. The image had been taken near a dock extending into the water. Finding the location took less than 20 minutes. Standing there, I compared the view to the picture. Same shoreline. Same mountains in the distance. Same wooden railing. For a moment, I almost expected Emily to appear. She did not. Instead, I noticed something carved into the dock. Small initials surrounded by dates. Most were ordinary. Then one caught my attention. AP. Beneath it was a recent date from 6 months earlier. Emily Parker. My pulse quickened. She had been here. Real. Not just a photograph. Nearby, a small bookstore overlooked the lake. The bell above the entrance chimed as I stepped inside. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. The scent of paper and coffee filled the air. An older woman stood behind the register reading a mystery novel. She looked up and smiled. "Can I help you?" I hesitated. Then I placed the photograph on the counter. Recognition appeared instantly. Emily. My heartbeat accelerated. "You know her?" "Of course." The woman laughed softly. "Everyone knows Emily." Relief washed through me. Finally, someone who actually knew her. "Is she here?" The woman's smile faded. No, disappointment settled heavily in my chest. "When did she leave?" "A few months ago." She studied me carefully. "You are not the first person to ask about her." That statement caught my attention immediately. What does that mean? The woman seemed to reconsider her words. Then she reached beneath the counter and retrieved a small wooden box. "Emily left something here." My eyes narrowed. "For me?" "No," a faint smile returned. "For the person who kept looking." Silence filled the bookstore. Slowly, she placed the box between us. My hands felt unexpectedly unsteady as I opened it. Inside rested several folded letters tied together with a blue ribbon. On top sat a handwritten note. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Emily's. My pulse pounded louder as I unfolded the page. The message was short. Just one sentence. Yet it changed everything. Because for the first time since this search began, Emily was speaking directly to me. And the first words she chose were these. "If you found this, Vincent, then I was right about you." For several seconds I simply stared at the note. The bookstore around me seemed to fade into the background. The shelves. The customers. The quiet music drifting from hidden speakers. None of it mattered anymore. Emily knew my name. Not guessed. Not assumed. Knew. I read the sentence again. "If you found this, Vincent, then I was right. About you." My heartbeat slowed into something steadier. Stranger than surprise was the feeling that followed. Relief. Somehow, without realizing it, I had been afraid of reaching the end of this search and discovering that none of it meant anything. That I had imagined a connection where none existed. Yet the note in my hands proved otherwise. Emily had expected me. The older woman behind the counter smiled gently. "You should read the letters." I looked down at the bundle tied with the blue ribbon. There were 6 in total. None appeared sealed. They looked worn from handling, as though Emily had written them over time. Carefully, I untied the ribbon and opened the first one. The handwriting was neat and familiar. The letter began without greeting. Sometimes I wonder if people notice each other anymore. The words pulled me in immediately. I continued reading. Emily wrote about loneliness. Not dramatic loneliness. Not the kind people talked about openly. The quieter kind. The kind that settled into everyday routines until it felt normal. She described crowded streets that still felt empty. Coffee shops filled with conversations she never joined. Entire days passing without anyone asking how she was doing. By the time I reached the end of the first letter, my chest felt unexpectedly heavy. The second letter revealed more. Emily had grown up moving constantly from town to town. New schools, new neighborhoods, new beginnings. She never stayed anywhere long enough to build roots. Books became her companions because they were the only things that remained consistent. The third letter changed everything. Halfway through the page, I stopped breathing for a moment. Because Emily wrote about the café. She described table 7. The morning sunlight through the window. The comfort of routine. Then she wrote about me. Not my name. Not who I was. Just the man in the back corner who always arrived early. The man who drank espresso and pretended not to watch her read. A slow smile appeared despite myself. She had noticed. Every morning I thought I was observing her from a distance. Meanwhile, she had been observing me too. The realization felt strangely intimate. I continued. Reading. You always look serious, she wrote. Like someone carrying responsibilities nobody else could see. But sometimes you smiled at something on your phone. Those moments made you seem human. I laughed quietly. The bookstore owner glanced up. Good. Better than good. The fourth letter explained why she left. Not because she was running from danger. Not because someone was chasing her. She was running from exhaustion. Years of carrying grief she had never properly confronted. Years of pretending she was fine when she was not. Ashford Lake had been her attempt to start over. To breathe. To figure out who she was beyond survival. By the fifth letter I understood something important. Emily had never intended to disappear forever. She had intended to disappear from the version of herself that was hurting. The final letter was the shortest. Barely half a page. Yet it affected me more than all the others combined. Because at the very end, beneath everything else, she had written a location. A cabin address beside the lake. Then one final sentence. If you came this far, stop reading and come find me. For a moment, I simply sat there holding the letter. The bookstore had grown quieter as the afternoon drifted toward evening. Sunlight stretched across the wooden floorboards in long golden lines. Somewhere near the back of the store, pages turned softly. Yet all I could hear was the sentence repeating inside my mind. Come find me. Emily had not left a trail by accident. Every clue, every note, every letter, they had all been leading here. To this moment, to a choice. Most people would have called first. Sent a message. Waited. I knew better. Some opportunities only appeared once. If I hesitated now, I would regret it for the rest of my life. The cabin sat nearly 20 miles outside town along the northern edge of the lake. According to the map, a narrow road wound through dense forest before reaching the shoreline. By the time I started driving, the sky had begun turning shades of orange and violet. Autumn leaves drifted across the road as the town disappeared behind me. The farther I traveled, the more isolated everything became. No traffic. No businesses. No crowds. Just endless trees and fading sunlight. I understood immediately why Emily had chosen this place. The world felt quieter here. Gentler. Like a place where a person could finally hear their own thoughts. 40 minutes later, I turned onto a gravel road lined with pine trees. My pulse quickened. The cabin appeared gradually through the branches. Small. White. Modest. Smoke curled from a stone chimney into the evening sky. Warm light glowed from the windows. For several seconds I remained inside the car. Not because I was afraid of finding her. Because I was afraid of what happened afterward. For weeks, Emily had existed as a mystery. A search. A question without an answer. The moment I stepped out of the car, that would change. I took a breath and walked toward the front porch. The wooden steps creaked beneath my shoes. Light spilled through the curtains beside the door. I raised my hand to knock. Then stopped. because the door opened before I touched it. Emily stood there. For a moment neither of us spoke. She looked exactly the same and completely different at the same time. The same blonde hair. The same thoughtful eyes. The same quiet presence that had once brightened a corner table in a Manhattan café. Yet here, without the city surrounding her, she seemed lighter somehow. Freer. Relief washed through me so suddenly it almost made me laugh. She was real. She was safe. She was standing right in front of me. Emily studied my face for several long seconds. Then a small smile appeared. Not surprised. Not confused. Almost as though she had been expecting this outcome all along. "You found the bookstore," she said softly. Her voice sounded exactly as I had imagined. I shook my head in disbelief. "You left enough clues." "Only for the right person." The answer settled between us. Warm. Honest. Real. Evening wind moved gently through the trees around the cabin. Somewhere across the lake, a loon called out across the water. The entire world seemed to pause. Finally, I asked the question that had followed me all the way from New York. "Why me, Emily?" Her smile faded into something more vulnerable. More sincere. She looked down briefly before meeting my eyes. Again. "Because every morning, Vincent, I thought I was the one being unnoticed." She took a small step closer. "Then I realized you were watching too." Emily stepped aside and opened the door wider. "You should come in." The cabin was warm and smelled faintly of cedar and tea. Books lined nearly every shelf. A fire crackled softly inside a stone fireplace. Everything about the space felt unmistakably hers. Thoughtful. Quiet. Intentional. I followed her into the living room while she closed the door behind us. For a moment neither of us seemed to know where to begin. Weeks of questions stood between us. Months of silent observation before that. Emily solved the problem first. "You want to know why I left?" I nodded. "I think I deserved that much after driving 5 hours." A small laugh escaped her. It was the first time I had heard her laugh. Somehow it felt like discovering another missing piece. She motioned toward the couch. "Fair enough." We sat facing each other while evening settled outside the windows. The lake reflected the last traces of sunlight beyond the trees. Emily folded her hands together and stared at them for a moment before speaking. "A year ago, I realized I was living the same day over and over again." Her voice remained calm. "Wake up. Work. Smile. Pretend everything was fine. Go home. Repeat." I listened quietly. "Nothing terrible happened," she continued. "That was the problem. My life was not falling apart. It just was not really mine anymore." The honesty in her words struck me harder than I expected. "So you left." She nodded. "Not because I hated my life. Because I could not hear myself inside it." Silence settled between us. The fire popped softly in the background. "And the note?" I asked. Emily looked away toward the window. I was scared. "Of what?" A sad smile touched her lips. "That nobody would notice I was gone." The answer hit me with unexpected force. For all the clues, for all the mystery, the truth was heartbreakingly simple. She had spent so long feeling invisible that part of her believed she could disappear without leaving an empty space behind. "Then why leave clues?" I asked softly. Her eyes met mine. "Because." Another part of me hoped I was wrong. The room felt smaller somehow. More intimate. More honest. Emily stood and walked toward a bookshelf. She removed a worn journal and carried it back to me. "Read the first page." I opened it carefully. The handwriting was familiar. At the top of the page sat a date from nearly 6 months earlier. Beneath it was a single sentence. "There is a man in a cafe who always looks for me before he looks at anything else." My chest tightened. I turned the page. Then another. And another. Entries stretched across months. Small observations. Moments I never knew she had noticed. The mornings I arrived late. The days I seemed tired. The rare occasions I laughed. She had been watching too. Just as carefully as I had. When I finally looked up, Emily was studying my expression. "You see now?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "You knew." "Not at first." Her smile softened. "But eventually I realized something." "What?" Evening shadows danced across the walls as she took a slow breath. "You never approached me because you respected my space." Her eyes held mine. And I never approached you because I was afraid of losing the comfort of wondering. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then Emily stepped closer and smiled. The funny thing is that we spent months sitting in the same room, waiting for the other person to make the first move. The next morning arrived wrapped in silver mist drifting across the lake. For the first time in weeks, I woke without questions chasing me. Emily was real. She was safe. And somehow, despite all the distance between our worlds, we had finally reached the same place. I found her sitting on the dock behind the cabin with a book resting in her lap. The sight made me smile immediately. Some things apparently never changed. She looked up as I approached. "Good morning." "Good morning." I sat beside her while the lake reflected the pale colors of dawn. For several minutes neither of us spoke. The silence felt comfortable now. Earned. Emily closed her book and looked out across the water. "You know," she said softly, "I always imagined what would happen if we actually talked." I laughed. "Only imagined? 4 months." She smiled. "Sometimes you seemed intimidating." "Intimidating? You always looked like you were carrying the weight of an entire city." I shook my head. "That does not sound dramatic at all." Her laughter echoed gently across the lake. The sound felt lighter than anything I had heard in a long time. By afternoon we walked through town together. Ashford Lake moved at its own pace. People waved from storefronts. Children rode bicycles along quiet streets. Nobody seemed impressed by wealth or status. It was refreshing. For once I was not Vincent Moretti the businessman. I was simply Vincent, the man following a woman through a bookstore while she recommended novels I should have read years ago. The woman behind the counter smiled knowingly when we entered. Emily immediately rolled her eyes. "Do not start." "I am not saying anything," the woman replied. "You are smiling. That is not illegal." Emily groaned while I laughed. Watching her interact with people who genuinely cared about her revealed something important. She had not come here to disappear. She had come here to heal. There was a difference. Later that evening, we returned to the dock as the sun sank behind the mountains. Golden light stretched across the lake. Autumn leaves drifted through the air. The entire world seemed painted in shades of amber and gold. Emily leaned against the railing beside me. "I should tell you something." "All right. When I left New York, I thought nobody would notice." Her voice remained steady. "Then every clue I left became a test." I looked toward her. "A test?" She nodded. "I wanted to know if someone would care enough to keep looking." Silence settled between us. "And?" I asked softly. Emily smiled. "You drove 5 hours to a town you had never heard of. Then you followed a trail of letters across an entire state." She shook her head slightly. "I think I have my answer." The sun continued sinking beyond the horizon. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then I remembered the café. Table 7. The countless mornings that had started all of this. "You know what I regret?" I asked. "What?" "I should have introduced myself on the first day." Emily laughed. "I would not have known what to say." "Neither would I." "Then maybe it happened exactly the way it was supposed to." The last traces of sunlight disappeared beyond the lake. Lights began appearing inside the cabins scattered along the shoreline. Peace settled over everything. I looked at Emily standing beside me and realized something simple. Sometimes people enter your life quietly. They sit across a room. Turn pages. Sitter. Become part of your morning before you ever learn their name. And sometimes the person you think you are searching for is actually the person who teaches you that being seen and being understood are not the same thing. Emily reached for her book and smiled. "Tomorrow morning?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning. Some stories begin with a meeting. Ours began with a missing chair. And somehow that made finding each other mean even more."